get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Heather Toma, and I work with the Coalition for Healthy School Food. And this session is offered today by George Brown College and the Coalition. And we're really glad that you're here with us for this session about London, England's Universal School Food Programs. This is part of a series of exemplary school food programs from around the world. And just wanting to let you know that this session is being recorded so that we can share it back afterwards with others who weren't able to be here. And as I mentioned earlier, please let us know where you're joining from. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And this is a bilingual event, so all the key information will be shared simultaneously in both English and French. So no matter which language you're listening in, you'll want to go down to the globe function on your Zoom screen and choose your language, because some of the questions at the end may be read in French during the Q&A. If there is a mute original option, don't choose that. If you have any technical questions, feel free to send a note to Ken Beher or myself, and that information is in the chat as well. And I'm going to let Ken now do an introduction in French.
Donc, bonjour tout le monde, j'espère que vous allez bien. On vous souhaite le bienvenu à ce webinaire aujourd'hui. Donc, juste un petit rappel que nous avons de l'interprétation disponible si vous voulez écouter la séance en français. Il suffit juste de cliquer le bouton au bas de votre écran, le petit globe qui est là au bas de votre écran, et juste choisir la langue que vous voulez écouter, soit en anglais ou en français. Puis si jamais vous avez des soucis au niveau technique, juste envoyez-nous un message, puis on pourra vous aider le plus tôt possible. Donc, merci beaucoup, puis je repasse la parole à Heather. Go ahead, Heather.
Thanks, Ken. And I'm actually now going to pass it over to Gary Hoyer from George Brown College, and he will do the introductions of our speakers. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Heather, and welcome, everyone. Today, we have three passionate experts from London who will present and take about 20 minutes each, and then we'll have maybe a bit less, and then we'll have a question and answer period. Our first speaker is Emma Pawson from the City of London. We also have Antonia Braun and Tilda Hadley, who both work with School Food Matters, which is a London-based charity whose aims are to improve children's health, education, and well-being through nutritious and sustainable meals, strengthen food education, promote access to fresh, seasonal, and locally sourced food. The organization also works at a policy level, collaborating with local authorities and partners to address food inequality and embed good food practices across the school system. We do ask that you hold your questions until the end of the three presentations. Our first speaker, Emma Pawson, as I said, she's head of health and program at the Greater London Authority and leads on universal free school meals for the Mayor of London. She works across a wide portfolio, including mental health, health inequalities, and prevention. She led the design of London's universal school meals, free school meals program, and oversees its delivery, evaluation, and stakeholder relationships. And thank you, Emma. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to attempt to share my slides, so just bear with me while I get them up. So where did all this start and why did we do what we did? So the mayor stepped in 4 years ago now, because in London we had over 210,000 children who missed out on having a healthy, nutritious meal despite living in poverty. So what happened before we had the universal offer from the mayor was that there were a number of children who were eligible for national government funding. The children who weren't eligible, their families either provided a packed lunch, they came in and paid for a school lunch, but many of those children actually couldn't afford it and ended up creating a debt. And therefore, in the end, a number of those children didn't attend school because of the lunch school debt. And then there was a larger number of children who actually just didn't eat during the day. The threshold for national government funding before the mayor stepped in was that a family who earned over 7,400 a year would be eligible. So anyone who earned above that couldn't claim national funding for free school meals. And just to give you some context, in London at the moment, the average monthly rent is over £2,000. So as you can see, there was only a small amount of families that were actually eligible for national funding for free school meals, leaving a number of families, which we estimate to be over 200,000, who were living in poverty and couldn't afford to feed their children during lunchtime. So what did the mayor do? We headed into a cost of living crisis, and at that point the mayor decided to step in, and he invested a large amount of money to make sure that every single child in a primary school in London could have a healthy, nutritious meal. So what he has done is over the last 3 years, he's invested over £420 million. In the first 2 years, we delivered 82 million meals, and we're now in year 3, and we're heading towards 150 million. So it's a phenomenal feat that we did really quickly. And I'll talk a little bit, you'll see why it was such a phenomenal feat because of the timescales, which I'll come to in a moment. But now we have every single primary school offering this offer. It wouldn't have worked unless we had our local boroughs, which are our local councils, schools, and everybody rallied around to make this happen. So this is where you'll see why it was such a phenomenal feat to get that going so quickly. So this all started back in February 2023, where I had an urgent meeting popped in my diary. And I'm sure like many of people on the call, that's not that unusual to have something urgent popped in your diary. Turned up a little bit curious about what this was about. And over the course of I think it was an hour-long phone call, we were told that the mayor wanted to make this intervention to offer free school meals to every primary school child in London. And as the call went on, I was getting more and more excited because what a phenomenal thing to do. If you'd have asked me before that, what would I ask a mayor to do? That would definitely be on my top list. Now, where my eyes started to get a little bit wider was that because this was a crisis intervention, they wanted to announce this by Friday. So this was Tuesday by this point, and anyone on the call who's developed a major program or major policy knows that if you announce something publicly, you have to have quite a few bits of information worked through. So with lots of late nights and lots of hard work, we were able to be in a position to announce this on the Friday. But then as we worked through that same hour-long call, we realised that we needed to have this live by the time the schools came back after summer. And in the UK, our schools break up around late July, which meant we didn't really have very long to get this going. But with everyone rallied around, and one of the critical factors of success, which you'll see in my presentation, was the power of storytelling, both through the mayor himself, and you'll see in a moment why this was so important to the mayor, but also using children's voices to explain why this was so important to them. So by August, we had every single borough, and in London, we've got 32 councils, and we've got 1,900 primary schools. We had everybody signed up and in agreement that they would get this ready by September. So when the children returned back from their summer holidays, every single school in London and a primary age child were able to access this offer. It was so successful that by the January, the mayor decided to extend it by another year. And then by the April, because of all the information and letters we were getting and the insights we were getting from our evaluation showed just what a big impact it was having on families, he confirmed that he was going to make this permanent until the end of his mayoral term, which was a phenomenal feat. And I think one of the most powerful letters that we received, which really hones down on why this is so important to our families in London, was from a single parent who wrote in to thank the mayor for what he was doing, because from their words were that they no longer had to choose between themselves eating or their child eating. And I hope you will agree that I wouldn't want any child to grow up in a situation where that is the case for their family. So this just is meant to indicate how fast we had to move and just how much it required everybody to rally around, work really hard, but we got it going. So I'm now going to show you a little bit from the mayor himself about why this was so important. So as you can see there, the mayor was using his own voice and storytelling to explain that he himself had free school meals as a child, and he wanted every child in London to be able to benefit from that as well. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we were doing on the policy itself. And you'll hear in a moment from our colleagues around the work we've been doing on food quality. The national government has now announced that they're updating their national school food standards, and we've been able to help influence what they do. And in particular, I think one of the things that we were quite proud of here in London is through our equalities impact assessment that we did right at the outset, we identified that there were some faith-based requirements for cultural-based food that meant it could actually be a barrier for people taking up the offer. So what we did was we've worked with our London schools and our caterers and our local councils to make sure that there is enough access to halal food. We've also offered a payment top-up, so extra payment for kosher food and for children in SEND as well. Longer term, we've been also looking at our procurement and supply chain, so working with the caterers directly and our contracting across the city to try and make it more streamlined and clearer about the requirements of food quality and food sustainability as well. And then running alongside that, we've also undertaken a number of external evaluations and been gathering in insights from families and from children. And in a moment in the presentation, you'll hear some of the insights from children themselves, which goes back to my point of the power of storytelling to win hearts and minds with this. Now, a little bit of a side piece of work that you probably wouldn't associate being around school food, but has been a massive success for us here in London. So if I can just cast your mind back to when I started talking, there are some children, if their family earn below a certain threshold, who qualify for government funding meals. Now, why that's important is because that informs the formula for our government funding that goes to schools. So it's part of one of the criteria that government work out how much money they give to schools. And because this becomes a universal offer, there's a disincentive for families to register because their child will get the offer regardless of whether or not they're registered or not. So if they turn up to school, it doesn't matter who funds their meal, that child will be able to access the food. So we recognise that we need to continue to work with families and with schools to make sure that families who were eligible for government funding did register. Along this process, we actually identified over 20,000 families who weren't registered. And there are many reasons for that, whether it's a language barrier, some didn't know they were eligible, and others, it was very complicated form, English isn't their first language. So through this process, we've supported all of those to register to the government funding. And that in itself, because it informs the formula of the money that goes to schools, means that we've been able to unlock over 50 million extra money that comes down to London schools, which will benefit families and schools and the children in them over the next year. And that's an annual thing. So what we've done is we've gone even further than we thought we would, far beyond delivering free school meals. And how we did this and how we got everyone on board and the work that we keep doing with the boroughs and the schools is we've done lots and lots of different things. And here's just a few of the examples of things that we did. We ran good practice webinars. We've given out resources and toolkits, communication templates. We've translated everything that we can into different languages that schools can use for their families. We've had public awareness campaigns on lots of different platforms and media. We've had lots of visits go out just to raise awareness about what the mayor is doing and why it's so important. And we have a regular forum where we bring everyone together. Now, in terms of how do we know how it's going? We have a number of different ways in which we can check how things are going. The first one is that we monitor the uptake of meals, and we know that around 87% and upwards of meals are taking up, which is a phenomenal result for us, meaning that the children who need it are actually getting the meals and are taking up the offer. We do both qualitative and quantitative research with families and schools to get insights back around how it's the difference it's making to them, how the policy is rolling out, and how it's being implemented. We've also had independent evaluations that's given us some really successful results and has just showed us how significantly impactful in many, many ways that this is having on families, whether that's on mental health, whether that's on easing financial pressures within the household, whether that's social benefits or children having a wider range of nutrition opportunities that they weren't able to access before. And we've also got a longer term impact evaluation at the moment, which is looking at the longer term impacts of the policy. So that's how we're checking how things are going. And a lot of this was informative to why the Mayor decided to both extend, but also make the commitment to make it a permanent commitment for the rest of his mayoral term. I won't read these out, but these are just some of the insights that we get from parents and from schools and from children around the benefits that this is having. So it's had some really positive results, which I've mentioned before, and I'll just take a moment for you to read some of those. And this is one of my favourite moments is, as I mentioned at the start, we recognise the power of storytelling, either through the Mayor's voice or through children's voice. And this is a pupil themselves explaining why they think that free school meals are so positive for them and their colleagues, the other pupils. This came from the back of a school competition that we ran, and this was our winner. So I'm going to play this. Cool. And then finally, I was going to finish on such a lovely poem, but I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing this year and beyond. So we're continuing to look at how we influence national government. So we've been working with them to expand their eligibility offer, meaning that more children can be eligible for their scheme. We've also been talking to them about what we've learned around school food standards, and you'll hear it in a moment from our colleagues around the work that they've been doing as well around school food standards and school food quality. And we're also doing a much bigger piece of work in London around the procurement. At the moment, it's quite piecemeal, and there are lots of different contracts, lots of different contractors. We want to use this as an opportunity to streamline things and to improve the offer that goes to school children in London. And that is it. So
That's great. Colleagues. Thank you, Emma. Those are wonderful insights into the program. Much appreciated. Our second and third speakers are Antonia Brown and Tilda Hadley. Antonia is a nutrition and public health specialist with over a decade of experience working to improve children's health through food education and community-based programs. She's worked across charities and health organizations delivering evidence-based initiatives that increase access to nutritious food and support well-being. And as scaling manager of School Food Matters, she leads national expansion of the Nourish program, building partnerships and regional teams to deliver locally tailored impact. She brings practical insight into the development of school food systems in London and elsewhere, including implementation, collaboration, and long-term sustainability. And then right after Antonia, Tilda will speak, and she works in policy and communications at School Food Matters. She finds the variety of food available in England endlessly exciting and believes in the power of food to bring people together. So thank you. Antonia?
Thanks, Gary. I'll just share our slides now. That should be sharing with everyone. Can you see just the slides? No, you can see the whole thing.
We can see the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
And if I advance that, does that advance you? Amazing.
Yeah.
You've always got to check with the tech.
Thank you.
So thank you, Gary. I'll now broaden it out a bit from London and tell you about School Food Matters, which is where we work, a charity working with local authorities and schools across England to improve school food for every child. School Food Matters believes that every child should enjoy nutritious, delicious, and sustainable food at school and leave with an informed and positive relationship with food. Children sit down for lunch 2,660 times between joining reception, or kindergarten as you call it, and leaving school. School isn't just where children eat, it's where habits are formed, life skills are developed, and new experiences are shared. It's therefore the perfect place to nurture a positive relationship with food that lasts their whole lifetime. So, what do we do at School Food Matters? Since 2007, we've worked with over 2,000 schools across England to deliver training, food education, and tailored support to improve their school food environments. Through our Nourish programme in the first bubble here, you can see that we support schools and local authorities to improve the food in their schools, in their kitchens. Through our food education programs, we teach children and young people about cooking, growing, and enjoying food. And this is either during their school day or outside as extracurricular activity. And through our policy work, which is what I do, in coalition with 40 other charities, caterers, and unions, we campaign for reform both at local level and at government level. We're based in London, and as you heard from Emma, London has long been at the forefront of school food reform in England. Everyone looks to London, everyone learns from London. All state primary school children here have been offered free school meals since 2023. And this strong leadership and funding from the Greater London Authority has allowed London boroughs to become testing grounds for what we call a whole school approach to food, which is when the school integrates food into the whole day. So it's not just at lunchtime, it's thought about in the classroom, it's thought about in the playground, it's thought about outside school. And this is spearheaded by the boroughs of Newham and Southwark, who we work closely with, who go above and beyond to make sure that the food they serve is not only free and healthy, which is great, but also exciting for the kids and exciting for the staff. The Greater London Authority recognises that good food promotes good health, it promotes better learning, and it promotes happier children. And they therefore fund school meals at £3 per meal, while the rest of the country only gets £2.61 per meal. And in many cases, catering companies undercut this number as well. So the meals are often being funded at more like £2. So looking more widely at England, which is where we do most of our work, school food is governed nationally by the UK government and looked after by the Department of Education, Department for Education, sorry. This means that school food is often considered through the lens of childcare rather than nutrition. And sometimes standards do suffer as a result of that. Free school meals are funded by the UK government for all children whose parents are on universal credit, as you heard earlier, which had an incredibly low threshold for the previous funding and now has a slightly higher threshold. So this recent expansion will mean that 500,000 more children will have a free school meal across the country this year, which is amazing. You can see here at the bottom of the slide the 3 different types of free school meals in the UK and what age they cut off at. And the difficulty we face as a school meals charity is that it's a very fragmented system, which varies based on age, location, and school type. This leads to a real postcode lottery where some children in England get the support they need and some don't. I've put on this slide this example just to demonstrate how complicated it can get. So here we have an example of a London primary school with a nursery attached, which from September this year will have 9 different streams of funding coming in for food and nutrition combined. Much of this funding, as you can imagine, consequently disappears into a school's wider budget. And school business managers find it very hard to keep track of what is meant to be for what. You can imagine if you have all of this sitting in your budget, you sort of end up reallocating things for vegetables when it's meant to be for milk, or that sort of thing happens quite a lot. So this is why Universalism is the gold standard, and it's what we're pushing for, and it's why we have so much respect for what you guys are doing in Toronto. I'll just quickly talk about the school food standards as well before we move on to our programs. So for all this funding, you think that there would be a lot of rules. The government tried to bring in the school food standards in 2015 as mandatory for all state schools. However, the standards are not really monitored, and therefore not enforced, and consequently don't deliver the levels of quality that they set out to. This is a shame, as the funding for school food is often funding meals which are high in fat and sugar and do not help children to concentrate in class or to live healthy lives. This year, we were thrilled to see the government launch the first update to these standards in 10 years. And the updated school food standards will set out clearer rules about the food and drink that schools can provide and focus on improving the nutritional quality of meals by increasing the amount of fruit, vegetables, and whole grains and reducing the foods that are high in fat, salt, and sugar. The new standards will also apply to all food served in both primary schools and secondary schools. And this will include the free breakfast clubs, where the quality is often lowest due to a lack of training and short time for serving food. These changes are being made now as part of the government's child poverty strategy, which aims to curb rising levels of food-related ill health in children, including childhood obesity and tooth decay, which are both massive issues in the UK at the moment. So I'll now hand over to Antonia, who will expand on the opportunities for improving children's health at school.
Thank you, Tilda. So yeah, as you heard from my introduction, I look after our Nourish program. So we've now heard quite a lot about what's going on a national scale, what's going on more locally here in London. But at School Food Matters, what we particularly do is we do a lot of work directly in schools. So Nourish is one of our flagship programs, and it's a proven evidence-based program for improving school food environments. And the idea behind it really is to deliver those positive outcomes for children and young people's nutrition, well-being, and building that positive relationship with food. So we do that through implementing a whole school approach to food. So we engage with everyone across the school community, including students, staff, parents, governors, and carers. Next slide, please. How is Nourish funded and governed? So we have a blended funding model. Ultimately, it will be people that are interested in funding specific areas within the UK that will come to us to commission the programme in their local area. So we have local authorities such as Cumberland, for example, commissioning us to do work in their local authority. We also have charitable foundations such as the Westminster Foundation, who are funding us in Westminster, but also have an interest in Chester and rural Lancashire. So sometimes there's the same funder that will fund a few different regions. But this really allows us to make sure that the programme is no-cost access for all schools and families. So all of the workshops, all of the work that we do with schools is fully free to them to make sure that everybody, no matter where they are, can, get the experience of Nourish. So as we've already mentioned, the standards remains being set nationally. So we work within the school food standards, but we support that local delivery. Next slide, please. Thank you. How are decisions made? So the government set the school food standards. We're very eager to see the updates from September, but over the past 5 to 6 years of the programme, we've been working with the 2014 set of the standards. We then sort of supported that programme design of Nourish, but on a school-by-school level, we actually co-design each implementation with the senior leadership teams at the school, caterers, students, parents, and carers, as well as governors, to help schools develop their own tailored food policies. So while there are the national kind of guidelines, we want to make sure that schools apply them in a way that really works for their school communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, we do this in a really flexible way. So we encourage schools to write a school food policy that encompasses all of these 5 areas, but we have also supported schools with us focusing on the things that are most immediately a concern at their school, and then support them in the long term to start looking at other things as time goes on. But for example, with food culture and role modeling, we really support schools with looking at the role that staff can play or any adults can play within the school to be positive role models when it comes to food, thinking about the language that we use around food and generally how food is being used within the school. This can also include things like using food as a reward or more importantly, moving away from using food as a reward. We also support schools with food provision and dining environment. So as Tilda mentioned, we don't only look at lunches, we also look at breakfast, break time, after school clubs, and anywhere in between where children might be served food at school. And the dining environment is a really, really important part in that as well, because even if you have the most delicious and nutritious meal, if it's being served in a way that isn't very appealing to children, in a room that's incredibly noisy, or simply just in a hall that's a bit too small for 2,000 eager secondary students that, are keen to eat, but really don't want to spend half an hour queuing because they would really like to play some football. We help schools kind of think about those logistical challenges to make sure that everybody, after they've got access to schools, actually makes use of that access. We also have a lot of primary schools that are still working on policies around packed lunches. So while we would love for all children to access a delicious and nutritious school meal, we know that there will still be some parents that would prefer to send their children in with packed lunches. So we help schools develop those policies to make sure that they are of a similar nutritional quality as the school meals that are provided by the school. And everything we do really has that through line of nurturing positive relationships with food, thinking about food education, how we talk about food anywhere in the school. And equity, inclusion, and sustainability is really at the heart of that as well, to make sure that whatever we are introducing in terms of guidelines or rules in a school works for everybody in that school community. So really the key principle behind Nourish is that we are working within the national standards, but we're giving schools that structured flexibility to make it work in their own settings. Next slide, please. Looking a bit more at equity, inclusion, and sustainability, what we do, which I know the GLA is also supporting with, is supporting schools with culture and religious diets. So we mentioned, for example, halal. It can be quite difficult for some smaller primary schools to offer halal meals simultaneously with non-halal meals. So we help them, do service in their schools and try to find a solution that really works for the whole school community to make sure everybody can access food. We also do focus groups with families of children who have medical needs or allergies to really think about how we can make sure that they're, not just eating a jacket potato every day or having to bring in packed lunches because the general school meal isn't meeting their needs. And most importantly, we also support schools with making use of their free school meal access and increasing the uptake. So as we was mentioned before, even though some families are eligible for free school meals, they might not be making use of that. So again, we work with schools on the communication with parents and really encouraging everybody to fill out those applications to make sure that we're getting the maximum amount of funding per school so that we can make school meals as delicious and nutritious as they can be. When we look at sustainability, we help schools set up food ambassador schemes. So we train up students to run food waste reduction challenges, for example. So they might on a Monday do like a little competition where they measure all the food waste in each year group and then encourage each year group to reduce that food waste. And it will be measured again on the Friday to just bring around that awareness. They might support that with assemblies. There might be modules within the classroom as well to really get children thinking about food in a slightly different way. We also want them to make more climate conscious food choices. So you might have heard of Meat Free Monday. We prefer the framing of sort of planet-friendly days because we found that rather than focusing on what we can take out, we'd prefer to think about all the lovely things that we can add in. So having more pulses and legumes in our meals and just generally, having more variety of seasonal vegetables, for example, to support those aims. And it's something that we found really resonates with children. So whenever we do the sort of ambassador schemes, that's something they're really passionate about. Next slide, please. So we've just finished a 5-year evaluation of our program. So I was actually lucky enough to work on our Southwark and Lambeth pilot. I also worked in Ealing, Tower Hamlets, many of the projects that you've heard about, I've dabbled in a little bit over the years. But through all of those projects, we've been able to, up until this date, support 35,600 children and young people through the Nourish program. That means we've had 108 schools that were supported to transform their food environment. We did 100 days of observations in schools, so got a really good idea of what the day-to-day looks like in a variety of different schools. And through that, we've helped 58 schools develop their school food policy. We helped 40 breakfast clubs to launch healthier menus and 28 after school clubs, again, to bring more fun and nutritious food into their clubs. We've worked with 7 London boroughs up until this point, and we are now also expanding into 5 local authorities outside of London. So that's what I'm currently focusing on. I'll tell you a little bit more on the next slide. But first up, before I talk too much about scaling and going out of London, Nourish really works because it's very deliberately designed to fit the realities of school food environments. We've spent so much time in school, so many conversations with senior leaders, teachers, parents, and governors, and we've taken all of that wonderful knowledge and continuously improve our program to help schools create that positive food culture across the school day. We really work with the whole school community. So any of our schools that do Nourish will have workshops for all different communities within their school. And, it does require that ongoing support and commitment from senior leaders. So we do a lot of training to make sure that when we finish our support with a school, they have the tools that they need to continue doing the amazing work that we've kickstarted through Nourish. It kind of gives you, highlights the opportunities and the structural challenges involved with helping schools improve their catering provision. Often the feedback that we get from schools is that they just love having someone there that's like an expert, but also someone that they can just blame in the first instance. A lot of senior leaders feel very awkward about breaching some of those conversations with their caterer because it's people that they see every single day. And sometimes it's easier to not have those conversations. So we can kind of help with that initial awkwardness and give them the tools and skills to have really productive conversations around food. Next slide, please. So scaling Nourish. This year, I'm taking Nourish into Cumberland, Birmingham, and Hertfordshire. We're also just starting our work with Worcestershire, which is really exciting. So we've taken it from our initial areas of Lambeth and Southwark, initially expanded a bit more across different London boroughs. And again, we were supported by multiple funders, including big public health programs, to be able to do so. And we're continuing to expand to another 3 regions next year, which is really exciting. Next slide, please.
So I'll just jump in at this point and tell you a bit about the school food project. So we want to make an impact in as many schools as possible, and we know that the best way to do that is through coalition work. And we do a lot of coalition work in our policy work, but we wanted to move that into delivery. So as part of the recently launched school food project, we'll be working with 5 of the UK's leading food and education charities to transform school food and food education across England. And this work is in partnership with the Department for Education and the Labour government, who have made it their mission to work in partnership with NGOs like us and businesses like caterers to deliver change at scale. The school food project will have lots of different bits to it, but it will provide practical hands-on support that is tailored to each school. The programme will begin in Hertfordshire, which you saw on the map, which is just outside London, and will then cascade across the country in the following years. From the classroom to the school kitchen to the staff room, the programme will unite the whole school around a shared vision of better quality real food, which improves health, well-being and educational outcomes, and we hope will set children up for life. And so this work will start from September 26th for all the schools that we hope it will reach. And we'll have something called the School Food Project Hub, which will be offering practical support videos to caterers and teachers. So this will be mostly e-learning, but there'll also be some live learning sessions that people can join and be part of a big cohort. So I'll hand back over to Antonia.
Brilliant. So I thought just to round off our presentation, I'll tell you one quick case study from one of our London schools. So we had a Central London primary school, which was part of a larger trust, and their lunch provision was not currently meeting the school food standards. And while it was a real, priority for senior leaders, they lacked the confidence to really challenge their caterer. They weren't really sure that they could challenge their caterer because they were locked into quite a long contract, and they just weren't sure that there's not anything they could do until they went back out to bid. So what we did through Nourish is we targeted training specifically for senior leaders on the school food standards to help with that more holistic understanding of what the standards are and how they can keep their caterer accountable. We also helped them introduce a compliance checklist and a monitoring and evidence gathering system. And that then gave them all of the sort of knowledge that they needed so that we could have a really constructive meeting with the caterer. So they felt that they had increased knowledge and confidence, and ultimately managed to agree some improvements with their caterer, even though they were still in an active contract period. So they managed to get some more whole grains onto the menu and also some better vegetarian options, which was something that their school student council had highlighted. And ultimately, we left them with really strong systems in place to maintain the standards long term, not only through knowledge, but also through the compliance sort of monitoring systems that we help train them up on so they could see how to do this on a day by day basis. For those that don't know, in England, often the school menus, if they are being delivered through external caterers, will run on a sort of 6 month cycle. So every 6 months, there will be a change in the school menu. This can be more frequent depending on the caterer that you're using, but it means that realistically, schools would need to check their menu quite frequently to make sure that it is meeting the standards. And it's also not as easy as just looking at what's printed on the menu, but also going into the lunch hall and looking at the reality of what's being served. Because with, procurement issues, it might be that sometimes what is on the menu is not what's being served. So helping schools kind of get that knowledge and the expertise to be able to do that themselves is really, really important. Now, we'd just like to leave you with some lessons. I said for Toronto, but any Canadian city, we're not discriminating against anyone else. But just some of the things that we've seen over the years of running our programs. So, some of the key challenges that we found with the sort of implementation is that here we have quite fragmented governance across school types. So, we have some schools that are local authority maintained, we have some schools that are academies, and the way that the monitoring happens there and the fact that it's different can make that quite challenging to implement across the board. There's also quite a lot of variability in the infrastructure. So we have some schools that have on-site kitchens. We have others that are so small that they get all of their food delivered either from other local schools or from local hubs. We have some schools where they have a dedicated dining space, but it might be too small for the size of their school. But we might also have some schools where children are eating in the classrooms. There's quite a lot of things that are going on that are so different that it's hard to have a blanket approach across all schools. Staff capacity is also quite challenging. So while we would love all schools to check the school food standards, it's not always written into people's job specs. So it's difficult for them to carve out the time to do those really regular checks. Every school in England should have a school food governor whose responsibility it would be to oversee that. But again, we're finding the reality in schools is that that's not quite happening yet. So really making sure that that is being communicated to schools is super important. Balancing cost, quality, and sustainability is another thing that we've seen is really, really tricky. We'd love for all schools to have locally sourced produce, but realistically, the main focus of school will always be cost, with quality being a close second. But it's just the reality in some schools that they're finding that hard to find a good balance across those three. And we also found that there is just that need for ongoing implementation support. There's often quite a lot of staff turnover in schools. So even if you are training up the current team at a school, it might be that they change over and the next lot of staff aren't as well trained in the standards. So it is important that it's something that's really well embedded in a school. Now, my final slide. I just thought I'd share some of our key lessons. So, ideally, we want to match policy with implementation support. Really important as well to engage families from the start. I think there's so much that we can learn from those that are benefiting from these policies and really hearing their concerns at an early stage, all the things that they love about it. It's really interesting to hear from families. Also, just really thinking about the dining environment as a core part of the system, because again, having really delicious meals is tricky if we don't have a space to actually serve them. And yeah, ultimately, really good standards still require some capacity to actually enforce them. And having some local flexibility does make it easier to improve the adoption and the sustainability of any school food program. Thank you guys so much. We're looking forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all, Antonia and Tilda and Emma as well. That's great. So we'll now move into the question and answer period, and you can continue to share your questions in the chat. Several people did submit questions when they registered for the webinar. So I thought we'd start with that and then get to questions in the chat. So some of those questions were, how did you work with policy makers to, I guess, implement and expand school food programs, both with School Food Matters and Nourish and the Mayor of London?
You want to take that one, Emma?
And I'm just trying to clarify the question. So I guess in London, the mayor is, and my team would be the policymakers. But in terms of the national response, what we've been doing is sharing our learning with national government. So all of our evaluations, all of the findings that we've had, the insights that we've gathered, has been used to share with national government, and that then has informed what they have done over the last couple of years. And two of the things that we have been able to influence was a slight increase in the price per meal that national government pay. So as colleagues talked about, London paid £3 per meal. When we started, the government offer was slightly lower than it is now. And using our leverage, we were able to influence up. So they've slightly increased their offer. The second thing that we were able to influence is the school food standards. And as I mentioned in my presentation, through the equalities work that we did, we identified that there was a need for cultural-based food, and we've been able to share that with national government. And then the third area is because we've been able to demonstrate just how impactful having a universal offer is, the government now have expanded their offer to include slightly more families to be funded by national government funding.
And who is responsible for funding education?
Department for DfE, we call them. Department for Education.
Is that
so it's a national government.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And the next question is, all school food in England provided by external catering companies, or is there some done on site, so self-catered?
I'm happy
So
to.
production models, yeah, sorry.
Yes, so there's a variety of different models in the UK. I would say largely we're seeing contract caterers. So there's a few large corporations. We also have smaller ones. We also have more community-based ones up in the north that are running on a sort of no-cost model, and some schools that are creating their own school meals in-house. So they will employ a chef themselves and cook all food on site. And I think I mentioned as well that some schools might do contracts with other schools. So if you're in a trust of schools, for example, you might have a big catering contract with 5, 10, 50 schools, or you might have a contract just on your own school basis.
Great. Thank you. Okay. The next question is, are digital platforms being leveraged to support the management and scalability of programs? And how, I guess.
What's meant by digital platforms?
Well, I guess, like, to me, and this is someone else's question, but and if they're here, they can elucidate. To me, I think something like Excel Scotland, maybe a procurement platform that makes it easier for everybody. I don't know if that works with a diversity of outsourced caterers, but in terms of online tools to support management and implementation of programs.
So I don't know if it's helpful, but we don't have a standardized school system where school food is ordered through. We do have one or two large providers, and we work directly with one of those called Arbor. And through that, what we do is we pull off data through that platform rather than ask the schools to report directly to us. So we've used it to reduce the burden on schools having to do reporting. And then the second thing is the government have just announced in their proposed food standards that schools will have to put online their school menus. So they're using online platforms in a slightly different way, which makes it a bit more accountable and for people to have a look at. Whereas at the moment, it's not a legal requirement or a mandatory grant requirement for them to publish their menus on their website.
That's great. Thank you. And the last question that was submitted, are you interested in any initiatives to retrofit old schools in terms of infrastructure so they can self-cater? Or is there anything, planned for that? And I guess that would be in London or in other cities.
I think the thing that we found, we have got some very old school buildings. We had some very creative ways in which schools found to be able to deliver the food. I wouldn't say we're moving towards a model where it's all done in-house, and I'm not sure that is the most effective thing for London. As colleagues have said, there are very different models across the UK, whether some do it in-house, some have external caterers come in. But we found a lot of the barriers that people thought would be there. There's lots and lots of creative ways you can get around that. So, for example, right at the start, we had people worried about the queues in canteens. We had people worried about how they would get children through to the canteen during the lunch break. And we had loads of brilliant ideas from schools and boroughs and children themselves about ways in which we could get around that. We haven't found any school not be able to offer it. So for us, there wasn't any need to do any retrofitting. We did have a secondary school in London who came up with a very creative idea of having a pop-up kitchen outside in their playground where they can then offer secondary schools. So although that's outside my scheme, because my scheme's for primary schools, we have got some very innovative, creative things going on across London to make sure that children can have the offer.
Great, thank you. And if we move now to the chat, Melissa was asking, are you using any tools to track nutrition and children health outcome? And I know you just started, a few years back. But is there any measurement of that?
I think I responded. But sorry, colleagues, I feel like I'm answering all the questions, so please jump in. The government have just announced that they want all schools to put their menus online so that it's much more publicly accountable. In their proposals, they're also suggesting they have a school governor be responsible for school food. And then they're also looking at having school food, I wouldn't call them enforcement officers, but a dedicated officer who would then be responsible for checking school food quality. In terms of how we track sort of the impact on well-being and health, that's part of our evaluation. I've popped a link in the chat that people can have a look at what we're doing. But I don't know if Tilda or Antonia, you've got any examples across the UK of anything to add to that?
Yeah, maybe the impact of how, these programs are doing a better job of providing health and education benefits to children than, prior to them being in place.
There's quite a lot of independent academic evaluations out there, which are publicly available, which do talk about positive impact. We do find that some of those are much longer term, but there is some really good evidence out there showing all kinds of benefits. And our insights have also showed benefits to well-being, to mental health, to families' pressure, to families' financial situations. But the academic evaluations do show wider impacts as well, and they're quite interesting to read.
That's great. Yes. And as you said, you posted that measuring the success of universal free school meals, London City Hall, in the chat. So anyone that's interested, take a look at that. Kaya wanted to know if you're willing to share any of your evaluation tools. Or are these tools accessible online? And that's for everyone, I guess. Yeah.
Yep, all of our information is in the link. It's probably the easiest, and then people can just pull it off as they need it. But from our perspective in London,
We can share our 5-year Nourish evaluation. We have a dedicated evaluation team that does that. And we have had external evaluators looking at our programs as well. So I can share that in a second.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And let's see what else we have here. Food allergies. I think Nourish is taking a look at food allergies as well. Someone's asking about food safety in the London Universal Program. And then there's a question for Tilda after that. That's from Grecia.
do we mean food? I think we've got slightly different terminologies here. Do we mean food hygiene?
Yeah, I think, yeah, just making sure food's safe, I guess. And that would be the contractors are, and since most of it is contract caterers, in the contracts that you're doing, I'm assuming that everything is written in there. And I guess this question is looking at oversight into food safety by the contract caterers.
So without getting too technical, we give money to boroughs, so the local councils. They are responsible for the contract with the caterers. So it would be built into their contracts, but it's not something that my team would do because we funnel our money down to the councils, and it's the councils and the schools that hold the direct contract with the caterers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Someone asked Tilda who's responsible for making sure the food standards are being followed and how it is monitored.
So our school food standards are currently on the previous version, which was brought in 2015. And they are technically mandatory for all schools, but there isn't a robust monitoring method for those. So currently, the way they are being monitored is mostly by catering consultants who procure a caterer for the school, and then as part of that contract, they'll go into the school and check whether that catering consultant is essentially fulfilling their contract to the school. So as part of that, they'll be saying, well, hey, is the food quality good? But they're not necessarily going in with a school food standards checklist in the way that School Food Matters would want them to. But as part of this new school food standards that they're bringing in at the moment, the government is proposing that there will be a full set of monitoring and evaluation as part of that. So there'll be a named school food governor. We're hoping that's not confirmed yet. But that would really make sure that the authorities in the school were looking at it from a top-down level, as well as the kitchens looking at it. They're also looking at two methods that, so the way that schools are monitored here is by a company called Ofsted, or a body called Ofsted. So they go in and check whether schools are doing lots of other things right, but we're suggesting that they might be able to go in and have a look at the kitchens as well, and ask the governors whether that is a box that they've ticked. Are they following the school food standards, yes or no? And we think that would have a massive impact on them being followed more carefully. The other suggestion is that there are the Food Standards Agency, which is another monitoring body in the UK that also monitors restaurants, have officers called an environmental health officer. So they go into restaurants and they check whether there are rats, whether there's, they check all of that kind of food safety stuff. So there's another proposal that they might go into school kitchens and check that kind of thing. But actually, neither of those have been finalised yet. So actually, Emma, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's
No.
perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Yes, and Heather had the question of kind of scaling up procurement. Is there any shared ordering and procurement happening across multiple schools, and I guess across caterers? And I know that I think Emma, it was you that mentioned that you're trying to consolidate, I guess, the amount of caterers and reduce them. And so, and that I would imagine would be partially to increase scale and reduce costs.
It's something that we're looking at for the next year. It's not primarily just focused on cost and scale. It's more that we've got a very piecemeal picture in London, being different. Everybody offers slightly different costs. Everybody has slightly different offers, and we just want to make sure that it all is in line with the national government standards. And if there is a smarter way in which we can help schools and local councils do it more efficiently, if that's saving officer time, saving schools time, that's what we're looking to do. But it's still very early days in London.
Yes, so I think, it's very important that the contracts tendered have everything included and all of the standards and kind of values built into them. Who do the individual local authorities are responsible for their own tendering of contracts? Is it?
Yeah, that's right. In London, that's correct.
Okay.
And we've
It-
got 32 of them.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so
a local authority level, but it's also schools can also tender their own contract. So we have some local authorities who will do big group contracts. So to answer Heather's question, there is that sort of pooling volumes happening on a local authority scale, where a local authority will either set up their own catering system or they will contract a contract caterer to then deliver to their schools, and schools can opt in and out of that. It's not mandatory, so you could still be in a borough that has a big catering contract and you don't have to opt into it. Or schools tender on an individual basis, or they might group together with other schools. So you don't have to be officially affiliated. You might have a school that's like down the road from you, and you just decide to tender together to get a better offer, basically, from caterers.
mhm. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll get back to the chat. Tina, you have a question?
Hi, yeah. Thanks so much to all the presenters. It's really informative and all the great work you're doing. I have another question about the caterers. I know we keep asking about that, but I think in maybe in Canada, there's a little bit of skepticism about the quality of food that caterers can offer. But you mentioned sort of quite different, like very big corporate caterers versus nonprofits or somewhere in between with the sort of smaller to medium sized ones. Can you just maybe comment on the quality of those and whether there's a hierarchy of quality or how does that work?
What I've found really interesting working in schools over the last 5 years on school food is that I would never be able to recommend one caterer over another, because it's actually often the quality of the meals doesn't come down to the caterer that they're using. I find it's way more locally on the kitchen team. So if you have a really motivated chef, doesn't matter what recipe you gave them, if it's cooked with love, you can feel that in the kitchen, and that's often where that quality comes from. So one of the things that we do through now is just really try to empower kitchen teams to bring their creativity back in. And generally, I think best sort of practice for caterers is making sure that we are empowering the chefs on the ground to have a bit of a say in the school menu, being involved in those early conversations where we're developing menus. Obviously, a little bit easier for schools to do if they're doing it in-house, because then you're more agile. If you're in a big contract caterer, you can't often make changes just on your individual school. You'd have to implement changes for the area more widely, which again, we've been really successful helping schools with that process. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's one model that works better than the next. It's really just down to the passion of the people on the ground.
Okay, and just one follow-up. In France, where I've done some research, I see that the caterers will deliver the food, but in the school there's like a warming kind of facility. Does that the case in the UK or does that?
In some schools, yes. So
Okay.
I've worked with some smaller schools. For example, some SEND schools where they only have 64 children. It's more likely that the food will be prepared at a different school, and then they have ovens and other warming compartments where they will serve the food. But I do find quite a lot of schools have their own kitchens where food is being freshly prepared on site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, going to move back to the chat again. And Gresha wanted to ask Antonia about the standardization processes you have implemented in Nourish for meal preparation and assembly. And I think you've discussed some of those already.
Yes, definitely.
Anything to add? Yeah.
We don't obviously deliver the food ourselves. So we support schools and we support caterers and kitchen teams to make changes. So we don't have any standard processes when it comes to meal preparation and assembly. But we have a very fabulous charity partner called Chefs in Schools who have a fabulous program where they train up chefs across the country to help with those sort of things. So whenever we have a school that needs more in-depth support on that, we refer them to Chefs in Schools.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Let's see. Stephanie wanted to know helping schools negotiate third-party caterers, so contract caterers, positive lessons learned. Oh, lessons learned about working with contract caterers, which, as you say, there's, it's like going to a restaurant to me. I mean, I've, seen a lot of programs as well, too. It's like the food is great and others not so much. So yeah, training, caring. I think caring is very important, but your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sorry, I feel that's another one for me, but Emma and Tilla, do jump in if you've got an opinion. So we caterers are genuinely really open to this. I think what's important and something that we help schools understand is just sometimes the timelines in which change can happen. So as I mentioned, if you're part of a larger national caterer, then realistically your menu for January might be signed off in July. So if I work with a school in, let's say, October, and we want to think about changes to the menu, we would be talking about changes to the like July or June menu of the next year. So often that's where there's a bit of tension in those conversations. But I think just being really open and clear in your communication is important. I think again, it depends on a school by school basis on whether they have positive relationships. I've seen some schools that have wonderful relationships with their caterers, and again, I think the key challenge is sometimes that you have area managers that take the meetings rather than the on-site kitchen team. So larger corporate caterers, you're not going to be talking to your chef on site. You'll be talking to an area manager that looks after 100 schools in your area, for example. I think that's where sometimes they find it a bit more challenging to be heard. But we have loads of schools that have really nice, positive relationships with their caterers, and we try to again teach schools about how to have those positive and productive conversations rather than just saying, we didn't like this, we didn't like that. We train up food ambassadors as well to really think about constructive things that we can change about the menu. So it's not a lot of just complaining at each other, but really working together to find creative solutions to make the meals better, either immediately or longer term.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I think the last question here, I actually have some questions too, which I'll hold to the end. Heather wanted to know how you make the connections to families, communicating with families, which is quite important, as you mentioned.
Yes, I think we're really fortunate that because we work on a school by school level, so I train up project officers that are working in the schools. We can set up parent coffee mornings, or we do parent and child cooking sessions, for example, to bring parents into the school and start having those conversations. A lot of schools, I think, really struggle with communication with parents because obviously everybody's really busy, they're working. The school day is the main time when they are usually at work. So we have tried to be a bit more creative with the way that we get them in school by saying, look, you're going to get to cook with your child. And then while we're doing that, we'll have those lovely conversations. We also do surveys. We've tried doing more online things and things outside of school time to really make sure that we're hearing all different parent voices. But yeah, again, that approach will be quite bespoke to each school depending on what works within their existing systems and communication channels.
Thank you. That's great. Questions. A couple of questions I have are: were any, and I guess this is for Emma. Were any of the schools reluctant to join the universal meal rollout?
Emma
So
had to hop off.
yeah, Emma's
Hilda,
had to go to another meeting,
Oh,
so
I'm
I
sorry,
can't
I
speak
missed
on
that.
behalf of
So
the
yeah,
GLA.
I don't know
Um,
if you can answer that, but
but
yeah.
from what I've heard from GLA colleagues,
Mhm.
no. I
No,
think a
okay,
lot of
great.
schools know how much the kids in their school are struggling. They see them not being able to concentrate, they see them just not being able to play. And I think the offer of free meals for, I would say, nearly every school in London was a blessing, not a curse.
Great.
But obviously can't comment on behalf of the GLA. So
Yeah. No, it's just so often you hear about, teachers and admin in schools being so busy they, can't get to things. So, and is
yeah.
participation, do you know, pretty close to 100%? And can you opt out? I think that you
So
can pack your own lunch for your child if you want. Yeah.
yes, you can. There are about two or three schools in London that have gone the full hog and banned packed lunches, which actually
Yeah.
is a pretty great move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because it means that there's no comparison between,
Yep.
one child that's
Great.
brought in a McDonald's in a packed lunch and one child that's eating a free school meal. So you eliminate that. But apart from that, take up is very high. There are some reasons that children bring in packed lunches, like they have ARFID or they're not being catered for properly in some schools. So there are valid reasons to bring in packed lunches, but generally the take up is very high, and the GLA have this is slightly complicated, so I'll try and make it less complicated. But the way the GLA can fund, sorry, Greater London Authority, stop using acronyms, the way they can fund at £3 a meal and not £2.61 a meal is by calculating every school at 80% take up. So they assume that instead of saying that every child will take up their meal on every day of the year, they assume that all children will take up their meal 80 days of the year. Sorry, 80% of the days of the year.
Yeah.
So by doing that, they unlock this whole portion of money that they can then use to fund it at £3 a meal. And that's why they've been able to get universal meals and push the quality up. So yes, the take up is good, but they assume that it won't be 100%, and that's given them a lot of benefits.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it I'm not sure that it's ever 100% for sure. That's great. And my last question is about food education. So um, I'm not sure, does that exist in London, and or does it exist nationally or in other local authorities? And are there efforts in London and elsewhere to incorporate more food literacy education, not just in curriculum, but elsewhere? I know, well, I saw that one of the slides, there was teachers eating with the kids. So, and that happens in Finland too, where there's actually kind of food education um, during lunch. That happens in the classroom in Japan as well. Anything happening with kind of enhancing or improving food education?
So in terms of the curriculum and what is mandated to be taught in schools, children learn, they have like a designated food education lesson until GCSEs, which is 14, 15. And then it cuts off. We used to have our highest qualification, which is A levels. That's like the final 2 years of school. That used to be available. Food and cooking and catering was
Yeah,
available at that level, but the government then got rid of it.
yeah,
And we're currently running a campaign to reinstate that. In terms of integrating the school meal with the cooking lessons, there's very minimal interaction. We're doing a lot of work on that, but realistically, a lot of the food education that's really good in schools is being done by charities. There are some national charities and lots of small charities that teach, including School Food Matters. We have food education programs, but there are lots of people across the country who are going into schools and teaching cooking, growing,
yeah,
tasting things you've never tried before, which have a really positive impact, but it's not something that the government is spending money on right now.
yeah.
Antonia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and school gardens too, I would imagine would be part of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And yeah,
So I
sorry, you
think
go.
anecdotally, like it's not something that is happening the same way in each school. So if you have a really passionate chef, and often we see this more in in-house catered schools, they might, work with the children on the school garden. They will then utilize things from the school garden, bring that into school meals, for example. Or we also have lovely chefs that will go in and deliver some of the food education elements within the school, but it just depends on the flexibility that they have within their contract, and the time that they have to prepare meals realistically. We also have some lovely teaching assistants that might take on doing some more food education. So something we help schools kind of train on is sensory food education. So really exploring food through all of the different senses, and just genuinely thinking about food education a little bit differently, but it's not something that's happening across the board in a standardized way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Ken, you had a question?
Yes, hi. Just thank you so much for that lovely presentation. I had a question regarding when you're having discussions about school meals with politicians actually in the UK, because we're trying to see, because we're hearing an argument that's coming up often, which is parents' responsibility, which is usually over here in Canada, it's a little bit of a touch. It's a bit of a sensitive topic when people are providing food, and there's often this recurring argument of it should be a parent's responsibility to provide food and nutritious food. They don't really trust the education system too much to get into providing food. So I just want to know how in the UK how you approach that question usually. So that approach.
So one of the main things that we use to counteract that is talking about big food. So I'm sure it's the same in Canada as it is everywhere in the world. But big food really have their claws in children, and they advertise heavily to them both on the street outside their school and on their phones. And there is only so much a parent can do to combat that. And parents are, being subliminally marketed to as well. So I think a pretty good argument that we use a lot with MPs is about it. Sure, parents should feed their kids, but they don't always know what to feed them, or they've been told by someone they thought was an authority to feed them something that's not good for them. And then there's another argument, which I'm sure is also a thing in Canada. Lots of parents can't afford to feed their kids. And it's not just the parents that are on our support allowance, universal credit. Like that's a very small percentage of families. And then outside of people receiving that, there are lots of families that are really struggling. And the government has this child poverty strategy that they just brought out. So we've really used that to um, make them think about free school meals as a tool for improving child health. And we bring up a lot of statistics about food related ill health in children. So, as I mentioned earlier, the obesity crisis that we have here and high levels of tooth decay are both things that we bring up quite a lot. And they're very effective to counteract the arguments of big food. Um, Yes, I'm not sure if that really answers your question, and maybe Antonia wants to contribute to that. But we use the findings from our work and our research a lot, just to show how happy it makes children and how healthy it makes them, and how much better their grades are at the end.
Are there any standards for limiting processed and ultra processed foods from meals?
There will be soon. So there are
Mhm.
some now, but they're going to increase that. So there are quite a lot of things that they have objectively banned in the upcoming school food standards. So you can't have deep fried food anymore. Ultra processed food is a bit more complicated because it includes a lot of vegetarian options. So that's not finalized yet we're currently in a consultation period, but there is a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of high profile voices in school food that are lobbying against that.
Yeah,
So there,
great.
there
Thank you
will
very
be
much.
probably.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, working to continuously improve programs is very important because programs do not normally start out great. They get great over time. Tina, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Antonia and Tilda whether you think there's going to be eventually universal free school meals across the UK. Is this a movement that you think will go beyond London?
Um, well, Antonia can have her take on this as well, but I would say not at any time soon. I think when you look at London, it's very obvious how amazing it is, but it is also expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ken said, there is definitely the feeling that parents should feed their own children, and that is pretty hard to counteract. I think once you've got it in place and someone's just made the decision, like the mayor just made the decision, and then it happened, and now everyone thinks it's the best thing ever in London. But I think proposing to spend that much money on it is hard, particularly when it's up against things like defense spending or like, our school roofs are falling in. So
Mm-hmm.
not to make it sound too doom and gloom, but
No, I can see that.
you've got a lot of groups that
Yeah.
say, please just spend it on something else. And I think that at, at the moment, there doesn't seem to be the budget in the government. They feel they've done enough by expanding to universal credit. So I think our stance is that we're, as a charity, happy with that for now. We feel it is a step on the road to universal, but we don't foresee that in the next, honestly, 5 years at least.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, and I think that's about all the questions that I've seen so far. I'm not sure if I missed anything, but if I did, yeah, right, we should thank you for participating. It was really great having you present and answer questions and everything, and a great program. And we've just gotten the federal government to finally pitch in for school food in 2024. So we've got a long way to go to catch up with you in London, but you guys are doing great work, and I know about it. There's even a School Food Matters in Tasmania, and Australia is now working on that as well too. So that's great. And yeah, it was great having you, and thank you very much. And
Thanks for having us. It's
hopefully we'll
been great
talk again
presenting.
soon. All right.
Thank you,
And
Gary.
that's it. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.